Elias found a room that wasn't on any map. There's a kind of fear that doesn't feel like danger. It feels like recognition. Like when you open a door and realize the room was waiting for you. Not a room, your room. And the worst part, you've never been there before, but you still know it. I didn't understand that feeling until the day Elias found a room that wasn't on any map. Elias wasn't searching for answers. He wasn't on a quest. He wasn't trying to decode the universe. He was doing something much smaller. He was trying to avoid his own apartment, because his apartment had become a place where time collected like dust. Every surface felt heavy. Every night felt identical. Every morning felt like being restarted by a machine that didn't care if you were ready. So Elias walked, not far, not dramatically, just long enough for his thoughts to thin out. And that's when it happened. He took a familiar route, through a building he'd passed 100 times, a building he could have described with his eyes closed. But the whole way inside was wrong, not broken, not haunted, just slightly incorrect, as if someone rebuilt it from memory. The hallway had 6 doors. Elias knew this, because his mind worked like that. Small patterns, repeated facts, 6 doors, 1 elevator, 1 dead corner where the light always buzzed. But this time, there were 7. The 7th door wasn't dramatic. No symbols, no glowing edges, no whispering voices, just a plain door, old paint, simple handle, no peephole. And what made Elias pause wasn't the door itself, it was the number beside it. 0, not 7, not 13, not B, just 0. The kind of number that feels like a joke, the kind of number that feels like a warning. Elias leaned in and listened. Nothing. No TV sound, no footsteps, no life. And then he noticed something worse. The air around that door felt different, not colder, cleaner, like the hallway had been breathing dust for years. But the space around that door didn't belong to the same world. Like the door didn't lead to a room, it led to a cut, a missing piece. Elias didn't touch it immediately. He didn't reach out like a movie character. He stood there for almost a full minute, staring at the handle, not because he was afraid, but because he felt something that made no sense. The feeling of being expected, like the door wasn't waiting to be opened. It was waiting for him to admit he could see it. Then finally, he wrapped his hand around the handle, and for half a second, he couldn't feel his fingers. It was like grabbing something that wasn't fully real, like shaking hands with a thought. The door opened silently, no creak, no resistance, and Elias stepped inside. The room was dark, not pitch black, but dim, like it was lit by an idea of light. He expected something small, a storage closet, a utility room, but the space beyond the door was wrong. It should not have fit inside the building. It was too wide, too deep, too balanced, like an architect designed it without human needs in mind. The floor looked like smooth stone, but not stone. The walls weren't concrete. They looked almost printed. And in the center of the room there was a table, a single table, nothing else. No chairs, no objects, no trash, no signs of life, just the table, and on it, 1 sheet of paper. Elias approached it slowly. His steps sounded wrong, too quiet. He stared at the paper, blank, no ink, no handwriting. But Elias felt his throat tighten anyway, because it wasn't blank, not really. There was something on it, not letters, more like indentations, like the paper had held words for a long time. And then the words were removed, but the pressure remained, a ghost of information. Elias tilted it toward the light, and for the briefest moment, he saw a sentence, not printed, not written, implied, like the paper was trying to remember. He didn't read it. He didn't need to. The sentence hit him like a memory. "You weren't supposed to find this yet." Elias dropped the paper. It landed perfectly flat. No flutter, no sound, like the room didn't believe in accidents. Then he saw the other thing. It wasn't obvious at first. On the far wall, there was a rectangle, a darker rectangle like a screen that hadn't turned on. Elias walked toward it, and as he got closer, the rectangle changed, not visually but mentally. His brain started trying to label it: door, window, monitor, mirror, but none of those names fit. The closer he got, the harder it became to hold a single meaning. And that's when Elias realized something terrifying. This wasn't a place. This was a function, a kind of interface, not for machines, for perception. A room where the world could be adjusted. And Elias understood, in the quietest way possible, that the maps he trusted weren't incomplete. They were curated. A map wasn't a truth. A map was permission, and this room had never been permitted. Elias turned back toward the door. He wanted to leave, not because he was panicking, but because he felt the room was noticing him. He reached for the handle and froze. There was a sound behind him, not footsteps, not breathing, not a voice. It was the sound of something adjusting itself, like pressure shifting, like a system correcting an error. Elias didn't turn around. He couldn't. He stood there with his hand on the handle, and he waited for the feeling to pass. It didn't. Instead, the room seemed to get clearer, sharper, as if now that it had acknowledged him, it didn't need to disguise itself anymore. And Elias finally understood the real danger. This room didn't want to scare him. It wanted to orient him. It wanted him to know exactly where he was, so he would never be able to pretend he wasn't. Elias pulled the door open and stepped back out. The hallway looked normal again. 6 doors, the dead corner, the buzzing light, no 7th door, no 0. Elias stood there breathing hard, his heart racing like he'd just run a mile. He reached into his pocket. The paper. He thought maybe he had taken it. Maybe he'd crumpled it. Maybe it was proof, but his pocket was empty. No paper, no dust, nothing, just his hand shaking slightly. And yet, his mind couldn't unsee the room, because that's what finding something real does. It doesn't just change what you know, it changes what you're allowed to believe. Elias didn't tell anyone. How could he? He didn't even have proof. He had a memory, a feeling, a room that didn't fit into reality. But that night, lying in bed, he did something he hadn't done in years. He opened a notebook, not to write a story, not to analyze, just to list facts. And at the top of the page, he wrote one sentence: "A map isn't the world." Then he added a second line: "And the world has rooms that don't want to be found. Because once you've seen a door that wasn't supposed to exist, you start noticing the others."